Hello, all, and welcome to the Movie Bears podcast. I'm Brad Harris, and each week I'm joined by some of my favorite husky, hairy, huggable homos to talk about film, something we love a whole lot on this show. And we took a week off for the holidays, so in effect, since our last show, it's been like 2 weeks since we've recorded, so kind of a break, getting back into the saddle here with things, with not one, not two, but 3 movies as part of our discussion this week. We're doing a little bit of post-holiday movie catch-up. We're going to be talking about, that's catch-up, not catch-up, because I don't think you used...
Ketchup.
I guess you could.
Catsup?
I guess you could use ketchup with movies.
Catsup.
Maybe you're eating fries in the movies. That's an
Hot dogs.
hot dogs.
Hello.
Okay, you know what? I stand corrected.
So I've learned something from tonight's intro, and that's that you guys have not eaten dinner yet.
We haven't. And I'm starving. Oh my god. We got a lot to talk about tonight. We are going to be discussing Cats, the musical movie phenomenon. We didn't get a chance to talk about this before the holidays, so we'll see how that goes. We're also going to be discussing Marriage Story, the new film on Netflix, and it was in theaters for a while. I'm not sure if it still is, but starring Scarlett Johansson and Adam Driver. We'll also be talking Bombshell with Nicole Kidman and Charlize Theron and Margot Robbie. So a lot on our plate. We're going to get to it here in just mere moments, but you've already heard from these guys, but let me formally introduce them. Jim Pugliafico is back with us in 2020. Hey babe, how you doing?
I'm back in the year 2020, which is crazy, but yeah, we got a full show, and it seems like it's been so long since we've been here, but we haven't been forgetting about movies, that's for sure. We've seen a lot of movies, and that's why we're going to talk about more than usual on today's show, so I'm excited.
Indeed. We got so much to discuss. I'm looking forward to it too. But to help us round out the discussion, please welcome William Lindis. Hey Will, how are your holidays?
Hey, future Brad and future Jim. Future Will is enjoying being here in 2020. It's been a banner year. Nothing at all scary or stressful at all has happened. Let me check Twitter. Oh, God, never mind.
Oh, my God. Yeah, welcome to World War III.
Yeah. But holidays were good. You know, like it was a good, restful time. It was also a good time for movies. There's a lot of films that sort of like sneak in under the radar of the year because of the way like the festival, not the first, but like the award circuit works. It's sort of weird. So it's been a good few weeks for movies, not a good few weeks for the rest of the world. But hey, I'm here to talk about movies with y'all. So let's at least enjoy the good.
Let's hope that 2020 sees an upward trend in all things. Including some stinker movies that have been coming out because there's nowhere else for them to be put out in the year. But yeah, also a quick shout out. We got some folks hopping on the live chat with us. Hello.
Goody.
Welcome. Glad to have you with us for our first show of 2020. Guys, this is also another milestone for us. I know we celebrated our 7-year anniversary before the holiday break. This is officially episode 350 of the Movie Bears podcast.
Wow.
Pretty insane.
Whew.
It's very insane. Like 350 of anything is a lot. But 350 hours that we've talked about movies, yeah, that's a lot. But it's still not enough.
Considering each episode is anywhere between an hour and 15 minutes and an hour and a half, if you times that by 350, someone do some quick math based on an hour and 15, we'll just say. How many days?
Right, hold on.
Hold
on. I gotta get this thing going.
What are we
here.
talking about? Somewhere in like the 430-ish range, just off the top of my head.
440 hours. About.
How many days is that?
So
that's 18 days.
18
days.
18 days.
Yeah.
So
18
That's
solid
a lot of
days
days.
of listening.
if you're brand new to the Movie Bears podcast and you want to catch up, hope you've got 18 straight days to listen to that back catalog of episodes.
If you've had some kind of surgery or, you're laid up, looking for something to do over the next 18 days or longer because you have to sleep at some point.
Yo, life hack, guys. If you start the Movie Bears podcast catalog 18 days before the end of 2020, we'll be saying this sentence right now, right as 2021 rings in. Life hack.
Oh my goodness. All right. Well, we got a ton to talk about. How fitting that a cat just jumped up on my desk because
Cat's up.
Cats is the first movie coming up in our discussion. Then we'll be hitting Marriage Story, followed by Bombshell. If anybody out there in live listener land has seen these films, if you want to comment along as we're talking about them, please feel free. If you decided not to see these movies and you want to tell us why, would be interested to hear that too. Feel free to jump into that live chat, say hi. If you're listening through the magic of digital tape delay, we'd love to hear your thoughts too on Facebook, or you can find this video on YouTube if you want to comment there. But just a quick word of warning, I guess. We're going to talk about each movie spoiler-free for probably, 10 minutes or so, and then we'll give a fair warning before we go into spoilers. If you're listening through Apple Music or Spotify, relative to when we record in a few days, Jim will have a time index in the show notes, so you can listen to non-spoilers, spoilers, skip around as needed. But if you're listening live, Will's got you covered in the live chat. He'll be giving you some live warnings and updates as we transition through the different parts of our conversation. So be on the lookout for those. Jim, Will, are you ready for some cat goodness or not?
I'm ready. Let's play with the cats.
Can one ever be ready?
That's a damn good question, Will. Well, ready or not, here the cats come. Our discussion of cats.
Ooh.
All right, so we'll go ahead and kick things off with a little bit of brief synopsis and some details about this film. Cats is directed by Tom Hooper, who brought us Les Miserables several years back. Kind of a controversial musical back then, and he's bringing his talent, his ability to Cats, which of course is itself an adaptation of Andrew Lloyd Webber's famous musical by the same name, which is in and of itself based on a collection of T.S. Eliot's poetry about a fantasy world of cats. Cats stars a cavalcade of stars like Judi Dench, Idris Elba, Ian McKellen, James Corden, Taylor Swift, and Rebel Wilson? ? Mm-hmm. And the plot basically revolves around a group of anthropomorphic cats participating in the talent show of all talent shows, whose prize is ascending to heaven and being reborn into a better life. Judi Dench plays Old Deuteronomy, the talent show judge who is in charge of picking which cat gets to get that new life. And so everyone, of course, wants to impress her. There's lots of singing, lots of dancing, and the numbers are kind of held together by a thinly based plot. There's not necessarily a lot there. It doesn't follow a traditional plot structure in terms of first act, second act, third act. It's kind of a jumble, like a basket of kittens going in 30 different directions. But I guess that's why it's based on cats. Even though it's a little crazy, there is some good stuff there, though. Jennifer Hudson in this film knocks it out of the park, in my opinion, with her rendition of Memory. She nails the vulnerability and howling sorrow of Grisabella, the glamour cat. And it's worth it for me to say up front, I'm not the hugest fan of the original musical. I kind of think you need to be high on LSD to enjoy that, but that's me. Other people, you may feel differently.
A lot of people were back then, apparently.
But
because for a while, it was like the longest running Broadway musical for quite a while.
Yeah, it definitely was. But Jennifer Hudson did an awesome job of pulling me in. I loved her performance. Some of the dance numbers were particularly fun to watch, even for me, someone who I don't traditionally like to watch a lot of dancing. I'm weird, I know. But Skimbleshanks, the Railway Cat, was a fun number. Just seeing a bunch of, CGI cat fur-clad people dancing on railroad tracks was kind of fun. Ian McKellen was awesome in this as Gus the theater cat. Though I kind of wish he had a little more to do. He was fun to see, kind of in a different role for him. I'd say if you love singing, dancing, a lot of CGI, this is maybe a movie for you. But I want to talk a little bit about that CGI for a second. Jim, you and I saw the original version of the film that came out, which had some CGI issues. Hooper mentioned that he was rushing to get the film out on time. They rushed some things with the CGI. We saw some things like Judi Dench's hands, her human hands. Instead of being covered in fur with claws, we could see her wedding ring and some other rings. Those things weren't covered up. Also, we called this out months and months ago when we saw the trailer. There were some issues with like foreheads that were CGI'd on, not like sticking to like the fur and stuff, and those things were kind of separated and floating around. It was a little hard for me to watch. A new version of the film was quickly pushed out that reportedly fixed a lot of those things, but we didn't see that version, so I can't really speak to that. But the uncanny valley factor was a little high for me. But I will say I enjoyed this movie a lot more than I thought I would. Going in, I'm like, oh, good Lord, why do we have to see this? I wish I was on LSD. Maybe would help. I've never taken LSD. I don't know, but maybe it would. In any event, I'm glad to have walked away with a couple positives from this film. But I'd say if you're not a Cats devotee or just a hardcore fan of musicals in general, this probably isn't a movie that you need to rush out and see in theaters or find on rental. But maybe you'll catch it someday on TBS or something and be like, what the fuck? Also, Rebel Wilson, can we please stop with Rebel Wilson? I'm a little done with Rebel Wilson. But how about for you, Jim? What did you think of Cats?
So yeah, like unlike you, I had never seen the original musical, or actually even really listened to like the soundtrack all the way through. I had heard Memory, of course, because that was a crossover hit, right? It became like a pop chart kind of hit. I don't know if any of the other songs did, so I wasn't really familiar with any of those. And then, of course, as this movie, the trailers started coming out, I mean, social media lit up with mostly negative, snarky sarcasm about, how terrible the CGI looked and how weird it looked to see cats or people with CGI cat features doing weird things on the screen. So went into this like not knowing what to expect. And I came out, I think, kind of like you. I think there were some things about this movie I was surprised that I kind of like, hey, that's kind of cool. I didn't mind that. The CGI stuff didn't bother me at all. The Judi Dench hand thing, we had heard that there was a revised version of the movie coming out. We chose not to see that. And then I heard one of the reasons why was, Judi Dench's hands. And I'm like, that's great, but I didn't really notice any of that during the movie. I guess I'm not really focused into like all the little features. I was kind of into the characters and the performances and trying to figure out what the fuck was happening with Jellicle cats. Like, what are Jellicle cats? What is this they're singing about? It was kind of alien to me. I didn't know any of that going in. And I even had to be explained after the movie, like, Jellicle cats, what's that? Oh, that's kind of a shorthand for like angelical cats. And I got the sense that the movie was about maybe cats trying to ascend to another plane or another life or the afterlife or being, selected or whatever. But like you said, Brad, Jennifer Hudson's character about the fallen glamour cat, I thought that was very poignant. I really loved that part of the movie. Idris Elba is always cool. I love him, but his character was really weird in this movie. Taylor Swift, I did like, I guess they inserted a new song, right? I guess her song was a new song. Is that right? What's it called? Ghosts. What is it? What was it?
Beautiful Ghosts.
Beautiful Ghosts. I kind of like that song, and I thought it did fit in with the rest of the book. The rest of the music. And some of the numbers I liked. I didn't really like the Rebel Wilson stuff. I actually, even though I think James Corden can be kind of hot, kind of cute, I didn't like his stuff at all in this movie. So it was a mixed bag for me. I would say don't rush out and see this movie. You could definitely wait till it comes out on VOD, which is going to probably be in a couple months or so, sometime in the spring or summer. But if like you said, Brad, if you're a huge fan of musicals, you've probably already seen this. If you're just curious, like morbidly curious to see how fucked up this movie might be to you, then I would say go see it. Otherwise, wait for it, get some friends together, have a party, get a little, intoxicated and watch it. It might be fun.
All right. Will, how about for you?
Oh boy. So I think like the rest of the world, I was very intrigued with the idea of Cats when that first trailer came out, because good, bad, or indifferent, it did not look like it was going to be a boring film based off of that trailer. And I think there's something to be said there. And going into it, I was familiar with Cats. I haven't been into a a production myself. I've seen like the recorded version of the the official show that I think came out like in the 90s. You can find it on YouTube and watch that cast doing it. So I was familiar with the story, and I'm not going to critique the story too much because I think they adapted the musical. The story is threadbare, and it's very, very hard to kind of latch onto things, but so is the musical. So that's not unfair. That's not fair criticism for me, at least, to kind of throw at the movie. But what is that for me, this is one of the worst things I saw this year. And I feel bad saying that because I know people got joy out of it, but
we saw your tweet.
Yeah, I thought the performances were pretty bad. Not that the actors in general are bad actors. I think there are a couple, you guys have both flagged who they are, who I would rather not see in movies ever again. But a lot of them are fantastic people who just didn't have enough to do or didn't take it seriously, or who weren't really given the tools to take things seriously. But whatever, it's Cats. You don't have to be a great dramatic performer necessarily, because I think more of what's supposed to come out there is through the song and the dance. And that's where I have my next issue. There was probably some really good dancing on set here that sort of got masked by the CGI. They did these body overlay things to where there were some strong performances that looked weird. And so even the thing that when I watch good dance, I can just say, well, I'm watching some good dance. Even that I wasn't able to get out of it. Jennifer Hudson sang "Memories" good, and that was a good part of it. But I mean, I could have gotten more joy out of just listening to the 4-minute track listing of that song than sitting through this entire movie. There was something very weird that happened in our screening, and I think this is the one positive I can really give it. Sort of our expectations going into this, good, bad, and different. This is not going to be boring, and this movie was not boring to me. No. There was a thing that happened in our screening where maybe about 15 minutes in, it's dead silent. Nobody there seems to be really vibing with it. And about 15 minutes in, everyone in the theater just sort of shifted their brains and thought, I'm going to watch this the way I would watch The Room, or I would watch Troll 2, or one of those weird, and it became this everyone just sort of started having fun, kind of laughing at what we were experiencing. Not laughing at the movie, but just laughing at the absurdity that was assaulting our eyeballs. And it ended up being a fun screening, but it's not because of the quality on screen. So for me, this was not the worst thing I've seen this year, but it's close to it. But it is far from the most forgettable movie. I think I've said before on this show, the worst sin you can possibly do with the movie is to be boring. And I think this movie is a half-star movie that I would rather watch over dozens and dozens of 2-star movies that I've seen this year. So that's Cats, guys. It's I don't know about Beautiful Ghosts, but for me, it was a beautiful disaster.
Well, I mean, I thought that some of the performances were really great. Brad you mentioned Ian McKellen. I really liked his character, and I thought his performance was quite good. Given what he had to work with, right? He had to play this. None of the characters in the movie were really you could say well developed, but I think that's a symptom of the story not being like it's not a heavy narrative. It's a really like loose kind of narrative, and I think that carries over from the musical, if I'm not mistaken, although I've never seen it. But like the characters that we got to know the best were probably the Judi Dench character, the glamour cat a little bit, and of course this main character, which I think is a new character. I think they developed this character just for the screen version. I don't know if this character existed in the musical. Maybe somebody can correct can check us on that. But even then, we really didn't understand their background, and to me, that was okay. I sensed that the glamour cat was a cat that was like discarded, and she was maybe a cat that belonged to some high society people, and they maybe left or abandoned her or whatever. And to me, that's poignant, and I really like that part of it, and that made the memories thing really strong for me. So yeah, I did get some good enjoyment out of it. Some of the other characters, like I said, the Corden character and the what's her name, Rebel Wilson character, were just in there for I don't know, just for laughs or some kind of comic relief, which didn't work at all, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I can say for that one cat, Victoria, the one that you were talking about, like she was like, I believe in the Broadway thing that she was like one of just like the dancers, like she did like a lot of like the ballet, but she wasn't really like a spoken line character. So she wasn't as much invented whole cloth for the movie as much as they like sort of used her as the audience surrogate and sort of like gave her lines and story. Yeah.
Will, it's interesting. You mentioned sort of that like moment in your screening when everyone kind of decided to like have fun with it. I found myself having a similar moment, but it was more about like 20 minutes into the movie, I had to like take off my I'm here to see a movie hat and put on my I'm here to see a musical hat. And it's almost like once I put that hat on, I enjoyed this movie way more. But it's a little weird because obviously this is both a movie and a musical. So I was a little conflicted about that, but I almost had to give myself permission to roll with the absurdity and the craziness of this film. And I think I got a little bit more out of it. But I don't know, like Jim, I haven't seen this as an on-stage musical in person. I've seen it on an old VHS copy when I was in high school. But Jim, do you think this would have been more fun for you if like we went to see this at like Broadway in Tucson, for instance?
Maybe. At least I would have understood the sense of what this thing was trying to portray, and at least kind of some of the songs. There were some things in this movie that I thought were just downright trippy. Like there's, we're going to get into spoilers, right? Yeah. I don't know if this was in the trailer. Maybe I'll just save it for spoilers. I don't even know how you fucking spoil a movie like this.
Yeah. Well, why don't why don't we do this? Why don't we go ahead and just move on to the spoiler section? Probably about 10 minutes or less for that. Folks who are listening along at home, if you're listening on iTunes, blah, 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 skip ahead as needed. If you're in the live chat, go make a sandwich, come back in 10 minutes. But spoilers for Cats, officially fair game. Will, thanks for putting the warning in the chat. While we wait for a few people to tune out or tune back in, whatever, want to give a big shout out. We got a bunch of people in the chat with us. Hamstratch is here, Steve Sosa, Adam Kime. Great to see you all in 2020. Welcome. Glad to have you here. Okay, that's enough rambling. Jim, go ahead with what you wanted to talk about.
Oh, I was talking about like some of the scenes in this movie were just really out there. There's a scene where there's these like what's the word I'm looking for? Anthropomorphic crickets or locusts or cockroaches, right? Are marching across the scene, and they all have little faces, right? And little like that's something you'd see in something crazy like a Disney animated cartoon or something like that. And then there's a scene, on the railroad tracks where they're all like dancing and in a line down this railroad yard. I mean, like Will said, I was never bored watching this movie. Never. Like, and that's to the movie's credit. But even though Will, I know you say it's not like we were enraptured by the amazing filmmaking. It was just the shit that they were throwing on the screen. Everything but the kitchen sink was just not boring. There was something going on all the time, and it was at least interesting to watch.
They did these things here at one of my local theater chains, and I know they do them at a lot of theaters across the country. Things like event screenings, rowdy screenings, like audience participation screenings, those types of things. And I think that there is something to be said for. I could have myself in like 10 years coming back to one of those screenings where everyone's like, you get your little
cats,
or not even that, but like a lot of times they'll give you like a prop bag with like things that you can do to interact with the movie and stuff like that. Like I can see this having more of a life sort of in that kind of like let's get weird with it kind of like cult post kind of post release status. Like I think that's where this film is going to get legs. It didn't really get legs at the box office, which is somewhat a shame. Coming into this, I think one of the things that was most exciting about this movie for me is that I want more of these like films that are sort of like aiming to be prestige films to feel like they're taking chances and to feel like they're allowed to be get a little weird with it. This one was on a lot of the awards, like for your considerations lists, and then just sort of like quietly pulled off after like the movie came out and they realized, well, I don't think that's happening. So I will say one character that I did like. I thought, like, in terms of the actors who did a good job, I thought that the strongest performance for me was I think Laurie Davidson. He's the guy that played Mr. Mistopheles. I thought that he was. So I said one of my problems was like the body CGI made a lot of the dancing like feel very artificial and stiff, and it takes away from the magic of what this could be. And so the characters who are more dance centric lose that. And the characters who are supposed to be comedians like Rebel Wilson and James Corden, they miscast them by not casting funny people in those roles. So instead, I was able to lock on to Mistopheles because this was a guy who a lot of his expressions were based on gestures and hand things, which the CGI didn't block out as much for me. So like when he would do his little, like he would pull his paws up or I got a lot more of that expression that I was looking for. So there's something there. Like I really liked him. I didn't know who that dude was. I had to look him up afterwards because I'm like, I like this guy. I really liked what this guy did.
So did Judi Dench remind anybody else of like the lion from The Wizard of Oz? Did anybody get kind of a vibe when she came on the screen or when she appeared? She did for me. But,
I was thinking more the cat on the Fancy Feast cans.
Oh, really? The big fluffy one? Yeah, nice.
Okay, so weird moments from this movie. Judi Dench multiple times just doing like these little scissor kicks showing her crotch to us. Not a thing I was expecting. Also, a weird thing.
We don't get enough of that in movies.
A weird thing with Idris Elba. Like, there's several cats who are just like bare ass naked in this movie. They're just like cats dancing around, and at no point did it look weird, right? And then there's several cats that wear clothes, and whatever. Yeah. But Idris Elba does a number where he takes off his coat and he's just dancing with his normal fur, and I don't know why, but it looked like he was just Idris Elba naked dancing around. Like he looked more naked in that scene than any of the other cats looked dressed similarly. Did you guys have a similar experience? Did it look weird?
It did look weird, especially like because he had like this trench coaty thing on at one point, and he's like opening it and dancing, and I felt like he was deliberately flashing us. And fun story. So a friend of ours saw both versions of the film before the CGI. Touch up and after. And yes, they reduced the size of Idris Elba and the actor who played Rum Tum Tugger's bulges in the CGI touch up version to make them less noticeable. So, maybe that didn't stand out as much to people who saw it a few days after it came out.
I kind of wanted to go back and see it after the touch-ups, but I mean, I guess I just didn't. I didn't have a good reason. Like, but
I got to be honest. When he was dancing around like naked, as we call it, even though he had this suit or CGI suit on, I was looking at for his package, and I was kind of stunned at how little of it there was. Like, I didn't notice a lot of it, and that was weird in itself. It's like he was like a GI Joe doll. Like, you know what I mean? Like, he had nothing there. I saw. There's
a moment where he's outside up on like a billboard. He's like up on the corner of it, and like the moon is behind him, and his like torso's at an angle, and it's there for like a split second. But I mean, there's like a giant fucking Idris Elba bulge that Hooper must have been like, oh my god, we forgot to remove his giant penis. We better get on that right away.
Rewatch.
Just so you know, Jim, McCavity saw you checking out his package, but McCavity is that horny cat who is totally into it. He actually prefers it when you watch.
Yeah, but now in the version that's out, McCavity's bulge is not there.
We need to talk about just for a minute. I know we're probably over, but we need to talk about this horny cat thing because maybe I'm not getting it. Maybe because I'm the owner of 3 cats. Cats are kind of sultry and, kind of the way they move and they rub on you all the time. And so that could be maybe construed as like a horny thing. I don't know. But where does the quote unquote horniness of the cats in this movie come from other than acting like cats? Or is that it?
Well, it's not just because they're acting like cats. It's that they are human beings inside the cat CGI, whatever. But these are human beings who are doing those cat sultry moves. When you think about like when someone's doing like at Halloween, like the kitty cat cosplay or something like that, it's always designed to be sultry and seductive. So you add that with like all of these dancing and the fact that the majority of these characters are essentially bare ass naked and like doing these like rolls where their butts come up towards you, or they're like doing these scissor kicks where they're showing your crotches to you, walking towards you, just shimmying so that like, yeah, they're moving their shoulders, but like kind of their chests are shaking too. These are all moves that are like, you would see like so if you were to watch a nature documentary and plug these plug these different dances in and have someone like, now we see the mating ritual of the anthropomorphic Jellicle alley cat. Like, it would feel naturally at home. So that's where the horniness comes from. Not the fact that they're cats, but because they're human beings doing, like, naked cat dances.
So people would have been better off if they saw cats, but that didn't act like cats.
I think what it is like when you inject the human part of this into it, that also injects sexuality that wouldn't normally be there. If this was like the new Lion King and all of the cats were CGI, like actual cats that were singing, doing those things, I don't think we'd bat an eyelash at it. But because it's humans and they're humans and that Rum Tum Tugger is like rubbing his bulge on Victoria, like, you know what I mean? It's really hard to put out of your brain sometimes.
And this is not specific to the movie either. People who've seen like the Broadway musical, like this has been sort of like one of like the running kind of jokes about the play. It's just like it's a horny musical. Like, and that doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing, but it's a thing that you can sort of like find humor in. Just like, they're doing these Broadway moves and these poses and they're kind of slinking their body towards you. Like it's good dance, it's good singing, it's whatever. But it's also it's a little bit horny, and that's okay. Like, if like of my faults with the movie, and there's a lot of them, the fact that these are horny cats dancing for my pleasure is not one of them. In fact, that was one of the like enjoyable things that sort of like let me still find something to like grasp onto. Like, I was able to like laugh at some of these things and have a good time with just like how over the top it was.
Yeah. So just remember, Tom Hooper, I think he won an Academy Award, right, for the King's Speech.
Yeah.
So, yeah, he was the director of the King's Speech. So
I don't think this movie.
I mean, the guy knows how to
win an Academy Award.
The guy knows how to direct movies. I don't know what happened here. I just think this was
Les Mis.
I believe it. Yeah, Les Mis. I think this was a passion. It sounds like this was a passion project for him. That he maybe just couldn't see the difficulties of trying to bring this to the screen. I mean, even though Cats, the musical, was one of the longest running and most successful musicals of all time, in recent years, even before this movie was announced or came out, what I think that musical was pretty heavily derided, even in the musical community, if I'm not mistaken. Like people would say, like, "Oh, Cats is terrible. Cats sucks," and I've heard that before. And so I think this. I don't know if the timing was bad on this movie or what it was, but I think some of the negativity was a carryover from people who never even really liked the musical. Perhaps I'm not sure.
I think we probably have two, for me at least, maybe better movies to talk about this episode.
Okay.
Like, what if we put this one in a chandelier and just send it off to the great beyond?
Only if,
Yeah,
as it's in the chandelier ascending, it's singing chandelier. Can we make that happen? That was my best Sia.
I don't know. Cats are not dogs.
Oh, goodness. Well, I'm sure there's a lot more we could talk about from a Cat's perspective, but we do have two other films. Jim, Will, how do you feel about moving on to our next movie?
Yeah, let's do it.
Yes.
Oh, goodness. All right. Next up is Marriage Story, starring Scarlett Johansson and Adam Driver. We, of course, are going to start the discussion off spoiler-free. So if you haven't seen it yet, no worries. We will protect your innocence. And then we'll give you a warning when we're going to talk about spoilers. But that said, here we go. Our discussion of Marriage Story. All right, Jim, if you wouldn't mind giving us a brief intro and your thoughts on Marriage Story. Is this worth checking out with your Netflix subscription or seeing in a theater if it's available, or skipping it even? What did you think?
Yeah, so Marriage Story is from writer-director Noah Baumbach, who gave us Frances Ha, Mistress America. Also, this is as Brad, I think you mentioned, this is a Netflix-released film. It's got its premiere back at the Venice Film Festival back in August, and then it opened in limited theaters, very limited, in November, and then it was just released onto Netflix, where we all can watch it right now. And I would recommend that people do go out and watch this movie. I think it's one of the better dramas of the year, in terms of its writing, its performances, just really, its subject matter can be difficult. This is the incisive and compassionate look at a marriage that's breaking up while trying to hold a family together. Stars Adam Driver, who we all know also as Kylo Ren, Scarlett Johansson, who we also know as Black Widow, right? And then a bunch of other folks that you'd recognize. Laura Dern is in this movie, who, by the way, just won a Golden Globe for her supporting performance in this film.
Congrats.
Just the other day. So she's in it. Always love to see her. She's been great lately. She's on a tear. Alan Alda, Ray Liotta, and Merritt Weaver, who Brad and I really like from Nurse Jackie and some other movies. So really great cast in this. The writing here is top notch. As I said, the material can be a little difficult. It can be a tough watch because what you are watching is a marriage and a relationship that was once portrayed as once really great, just totally disintegrated. A lot of rough things are said between the husband and the wife who are breaking up. I mean, if you're in a relationship or a marriage, watching this can lead you to maybe self-examine your relationship. And then that doesn't mean your relationship is not a good one, a great one, or it doesn't mean you're going to split up or get a divorce. But it's the kind of film where you see people interacting in this way, you can't help but think of putting yourself in those situations. And that's what a great film does. And I really, really loved Marriage Story. I'm not sure if it's going to make my top films of the year. We'll have to wait till next week. But this is one that this is on Netflix. Almost everybody should have access to Netflix. almost everybody. And if you don't, find a friend who does. Watch this film. Like I said, it's a drama. It's not a comedy. It's not going to lift you up, but it is a great film with great performances, great writing, great direction. Yeah, I'd recommend this really strongly.
All right. Big recommend from Jim. Will, did this movie resonate as much for you?
What he said. No. Okay, I need to say more than that. No. This is one of my favorite movies of the year, and I think that it's one of those films that is very easy to put in like top 10 contention. And I think part of that's because I'm sort of naturally inclined to like Noah Baumbach's stories and his films. I think he's an excellent writer, especially at making these stories that find these very cinematic moments out of very real scenarios. In this case, we're just watching two relatively normal people going through the highs, the lows, and the very, very, very lows of the dissolution of a marriage. And a lot of these scenes, if anyone has ever been through any type of, whether it be a divorce or a breakup or anything like that, like a lot of these scenes are going to feel uncomfortably familiar to you. And the writing stays sharp and incisive all the way through, and it's catapulted along by those performances. This has been an absolutely stellar year for Scarlett Johansson between this and Jojo Rabbit. I mean, she is putting in some absolute work. Adam Driver with this off of Kylo Ren. I mean, these are two actors who are sort of at a, I would say both of those actors could probably look at this year and say that these were like peak years for their careers. And that's an awesome thing to be able to say. Laura Dern is so damn good in this, which is not a surprise because she's fucking Laura Dern, people. But she is really good here. And it was nice because we've also seen her recently in Little Women playing more of like the motherly role, and it's nice to see that. But we get to see Laura Dern kind of kick some ass here. She's very much like
she's chewing scenery in this.
She is chewing scenery. She's going for that big acting, but she's able to do it in a very compelling way. Now, I love Marriage Story. I remember at the end of this, I watched this movie by myself and in the theater, and right afterwards, I was sitting next to this guy who had also come in, this older guy, and he had seen it by himself too. And he looks over at me right afterwards, and he's just got tears in his eyes, and he just says, "That was a really good movie, wasn't it?" And so while the credits are rolling, we just have this quick conversation about how much we enjoyed and resonated with this thing. And it was such an uplifting experience for a movie that wasn't always uplifting. Yeah, Marriage Story is one of the best films of the year, and I hope people check it out.
Wow, two big recommends from the two of you. I hate to be the negative Nancy here and come in and talk about how much this movie did not work for me, so I won't, because it really worked for me on many, many, many levels. Although I will say it was a little weird because we, well, for two reasons. One, we just seen Star Wars Rise of Skywalker. And so trying to divorce, see what I did there? Adam Driver's performance as Kylo Ren from his performance in this film was a little difficult for me at first, especially when he's like on the phone with Scarlett Johansson. There was a little bit of like, "I'll be home soon. I'll help put the child to bed." I was just like, no, that's not Kylo Ren. It's a phone conversation. Two, Jim, I hope this is okay to say. Jim and I were having a little bit of tension before we saw this movie. I completely forget what it was even about. We were sniping each other about something. It was probably mostly me sniping and poor Jim being the target of it. But I must have turned to Jim 3 times during this movie and been like, "Babe, are we getting a divorce?" And
I reassured him that we are not there. So no, nothing was at the level of this movie. I can tell you. We'll get into that in spoilers because there was some crazy stuff.
Yeah, there was really a lot. And, you know, Will, you mentioned like anybody that's gone through a bad breakup or divorce. I've never been through a divorce myself, but I mean, I saw my parents go through a divorce, and I've been through some really bad breakups in my time. And I felt all of that, you know, so many elements that I personally resonated with. And, during my last really bad breakup with my previous partner, we went to like couples counseling, and I learned how to communicate better. And I feel like that helped me a lot. Jim, I still have my communication issues, that, but I'm a lot better than I used to be.
We all do. We all do, Brad.
But I really found myself, again with that self-examination piece, right? Like looking at my own behavior and my own relationship. And I love movies that get me thinking that way. So really, really great. Really hits you in the feels in many ways. Fucking Laura Dern, man, in this movie. I love her so much. And see her strutting around in high heels, just being a total badass lawyer. It was really refreshing. It was really great to see. Also, Wallace Shawn showed up in this movie, which I did not expect. Mr. Inconceivable himself from The Princess Bride, with some very vulgar language in this movie, was an absolute delight. Alan Alda, I fucking love that man so much. So happy to see him here. Ray Liotta, not so much. And Merritt Weaver. Oh, I adore Merritt Weaver. Not so much on The Walking Dead, but she was really wonderful on Nurse Jackie and some other things we've seen her in. Scarlett Johansson, I mean, she's one of my favorite actresses of all time now. Not necessarily because of the Marvel stuff. She's done so many other great things outside of the Black Widow role. But, man, I don't think you could ask for a better cast here. Adam Driver fucking sells it on so many levels. Once I got the Kylo Ren helmet like off of him and kind of forgot about that, I was really able to kind of delve in, identify with his character. And he's going through some stuff during this divorce where I'm just like, fuck, I want to buy this guy a beer and just give him a hug. Can I do that somehow, please? Really, really powerful stuff. So this is a big, huge recommend for me. Marriage Story, Netflix. Go see it now. Just, be prepared to maybe feel a little uncomfortable and anxious sometimes.
Oh, this is not a date movie. Like that. Like this isn't like
This is the anti-date movie.
This is the anti-date movie. Yeah. This isn't like a honey. Let's see what's on Netflix tonight. No. This isn't it. But it fills a lot of other like. Yeah.
Can you imagine Laura Dern reading the script for her character? And can you imagine any actress reading that script that that character was offered to and turning that down? I mean, that role was so juicy and so great, and she got every bit of sass out of that role. I really loved it. The movie was worth watching just for her scenes alone. Never mind the two lead scenes, which were fantastic. There's some things I want to talk about in spoilers when we get there about how this relationship was portrayed and how things progressed in the movie. But I think there'd be spoilers to talk about it now. But I thought it was very interesting how they approached this movie, how they kind of flavored the two main characters.
And they did it in such a way that I think that it's very easy in this type of movie to make it to where one character is the good guy and one character is the bad guy. And I always take issue with that because I mean, there are obviously some relationships where one person is the, especially like in abuse situations, that type of thing. Like there's obviously sometimes relationships end because one person's a bad guy, but a lot of them just end because something happens. People fall out of sync with each other. Priorities change. Real world issues come to play. A lot of times both people kind of messed up in some way, shape, or form, usually with communication. And I really like that with this movie. It didn't feel like it was like, go him, boo her, or go her, boo him. Both of the characters here are remarkably relatable characters who you're rooting for. And you can also, both of them are characters who make mistakes and don't necessarily do what they should when they're navigating this thing. And because of that, it feels so much more nuanced and balanced. It feels like how a real breakup is. And I love that. I appreciate it. And I wish we could see more films sort of look at relationships, less like who wins and who loses, and more like the kind of the complicated things that they are.
Yeah, I think honesty is the word that pops out at me. Like this felt like an honest relationship going through an honest divorce, right? And I'll talk more about what makes me think that when we get to spoilers.
I think now is probably an appropriate time to make that transition if you guys are ready.
Sure. Absolutely. Let's get on
All
it.
right, we got a thumbs.
I'll call my lawyer.
Got a thumbs up from Will. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and initiate spoiler warning now. Blah blah blah. Spoilers for Marriage Story on Netflix are incoming. If you haven't seen the film yet, go ahead and skip ahead using the time index. If you're on digital tape delay, if you're listening live, you probably saw Will's note in the chat already. But go ahead, step away for 10 minutes. Come on back because our bombshell discussion is still on the way. You don't want to miss that. Hopefully, question mark. In any event, spoilers are indeed totally fair game. Jim, it seemed like you maybe had a thought you wanted to bring up before the cut. What were you thinking?
Yeah, I wanted to kind of follow up on Will was saying, like where it maybe didn't necessarily portray either one of the main characters as being like a bad person or a good person. I think they both had their issues, but I think the movie did, at least for me, and maybe this isn't everybody's what everybody took away from it, and that's why I like to talk about movies, is that I thought that her motivations for the divorce, at least initially, weren't really presented strongly at the beginning. I think we knew that he had an affair. I think we learned that, but it just didn't seem like that was the reason for the like the main reason. That might have been one of the reasons, but it seemed like she was the I guess
catalyst.
It sounds like she was the instigator catalyst for the divorce action, right? She initially got a lawyer, all that, after they had agreed that they weren't going to do that, and it wasn't clear at some point. At least if you're looking at it from if you're relating to the Adam Driver character, and he's kind of wondering out loud, like, why is she doing this? Why, we had an agreement. This is how we were going to get divorced, but this is how we were going to handle it. And then she goes this complete route, and then Laura Dern gets in the picture, and it gets put on steroids. So it was very interesting how they did that. At least that's the way I felt. I felt like I couldn't fully understand her motivations until later on, and I think I kind of understood where she was coming from in terms of like her career and what she wanted and being brought to New York and all that stuff. But he obviously was a he wasn't really willing to go through with the divorce like she was.
And that whole process was so interesting to me because, like, I think I mentioned before with my last partner before we broke up, we went through couples counseling. So we had a therapist who was trying to help us mediate and work through some of the issues. And, we didn't go through like a legal divorce, but we did break up and we had to figure out like, okay, who's getting the PlayStation? Who's getting the Rock Band stuff? Who's getting the grill? And we were able to kind of work some of those things out just internally between us, kind of with the help of a couples counselor, right? But watching this movie and seeing the lawyers get involved, I'm like, fuck, that's where shit goes completely off the fucking rails, it seems like, right? Because the lawyers are like, no, you're entitled to this, and you should have this, and I think you should do this, and they pump each person up and make them into these, like, fucking robo-warriors, like, going to war, instead of, like, two people trying to earnestly work through things. And so it raises some question for me. Do lawyers do more harm than good in these situations sometimes, depending on the relationship and who's involved?
I think that I think that one of the things that this film did very deftly was sort of like keeping the infidelity as a less central aspect to the film, because I think that sort of in narrative short form, when we hear that someone was unfaithful to their partner, our brain immediately goes, okay, they're the bad guy. They're the ones that we're not. And not defending infidelity here, obviously, but I think that it would have, if that had really been like the first 10 minutes of the movie had really focused more on that, I think that it would have been hard to have watched the rest of the movie in that same kind of like center of the aisle seat that the film was sort of aiming for. And so I like that it was one of the things that was in the stew, but it wasn't the only thing in the stew. Also in the stew was their differing ideas on kind of where they want their careers to go, and their power dynamic between the two. Both feel that they're sort of stifled by the other, and that's unfortunately a thing that can happen with relationships. You have to make compromises, and sometimes in doing so you feel compromised. I liked all of that, and I liked that, you know, I liked that both of the lawyers in this, like, as is
all three of the lawyers, actually.
well, all three of the lawyers, yeah. You know, they had their clients' best interests in mind, and in some cases that meant at the odds of the other person. I'm not a divorce attorney myself, nor is that a field that I'm going into, so I'm not stumping for them specifically. But I think that it was really interesting looking at these. You know, I think that I almost wonder if they would have been able to have worked this out amicably without this, because I think one of the other things that we sort of saw through the first part of the movie is both people were sort of unwilling to really kind of like speak their wants to the other, whether it be through the couples counseling or whether it be kind of how they were handling the divorce. Like, there was just a lot of, they weren't saying stuff. And so on the surface, things were really good, but underneath, like, things were bubbling up, and we're probably going to get to this point anyways. And I love that we can look at this and go, like, did the lawyers make it better, make it worse? Were they already on the track to make things worse? Could they have worked things out? There's a lot of different angles here. And at the end of the day, it's just, human beings are messy, complicated things. And in this case, it was sort of cathartic to me to be able to watch these other human beings have this experience. And we're in the spoiler section of it. Things changed for them dramatically and in ways that I think neither of them would have wanted, obviously, going into the relationship. But I think there's still like a kernel of hope here. Like, these are people that were able to come out of the other side of the machine, maybe a bit mangled, but not fully broken.
Yeah, it didn't appear like it was going to be. Yes, their lives were changed, in some ways rather dramatically. But like you said, Will, not in a way that like totally, destroyed either of them. And I think it was interesting to see, especially from the Adam Driver character perspective, how, he wanted to maintain kind of a friendship. I mean, I think that was talked about a lot in the movie, and I can relate to that. I mean, I'm one who's been through a divorce and wanting to maintain, this is a person you've loved for X many years, right? And you're a big part of your life. And, so the marriage isn't going to work out, but there's still a some level of a relationship there that maybe you want to keep. Now, every divorce, I'm sure, is different. There are some divorces where whether it's abuse or something terrible has happened, and you don't really want anything to do with that person. But
yeah.
But I could relate to the way this, the story between these two characters came about, and how, they wanted to preserve that friendship, and how the involvement of lawyers, like, just in some ways, like, ripped some of that to shreds, at least initially. It was brutal the way the Ray Liotta character and the Laura Dern character kind of approach things when it comes to divorce. But just some fascinating stuff in here. There's a lot of layers to the story, just like there's a lot of layers to a relationship, and a movie that can portray that on the screen effectively, I think is really good.
I know we have another movie to talk about, but one more thing I just wanted to mention is how this portrays the effect of divorce on a kid, right? One of the things I specifically want to point to is Halloween. So this poor kid, right? At first I'm like, oh, fuck this kid. He's such a little, like, twerp. But then, like, Halloween comes and, mom is taking him for Halloween with the cousins or whatever. And then, dad gets him on Halloween too. This poor kid is tuckered out from trick-or-treating. He's been walking around for hours. Well, now he has to go walking around and try and go trick-or-treating with dad.
Yeah.
But everything, has kind of shut down.
It's closed.
They have to fucking go to a convenience store and ask for candy for Halloween. And this kid is just being, like, pulled by both ends and dragged all over the place. And, I don't think there is an easy way to handle divorce and its impacts on a kid. But I don't know. It was really interesting to see it portrayed that way.
Mm. I will say that I thought those scenes around the Halloween time were really effective, but then there was a scene later that made me roll my eyes because they had already made this point, and then they had to
Oh,
kind of visually show
yeah.
us. Do you know the one I'm talking about, where they're both like grabbing the kid by one arm and like going in different
Yep.
directions? I'm like, oh, you did not have to do that. That's really hacky, and you already made your point, and we get it. And I don't know. It's a nit. It's a nit on the movie. This movie's fantastic. I just wish that thing wasn't in it. It was in the trailer too, and I'm like, please cut that out of the movie, and they didn't.
Indeed. Well, even nits aside, it sounds like this movie was a big, big win for all three of us. Kind of a a refreshing movie to see after watching Cats, maybe. But we have one more film to talk about for our 350th episode. Jim, Will, are you ready to transition into our discussion of Bombshell?
I'm ready for a fair, balanced discussion.
No.
Fair and balanced. That's not something I'd apply to a movie about Fox News. All right. I think that's where you're going with that, Will.
What?
So just as with the other movies we've discussed this episode, in case you haven't seen or heard, I guess, the warnings, we're going to talk about Bombshell, spoiler-free, for probably 10 minutes or so. Then we'll go into spoilers, so if you're worried about being spoiled, if you haven't seen it, not to worry, we'll protect your innocence. Skip ahead as needed, digital tape delay, blah, blah, fucking blah. Here we go. Our discussion of Bombshell. All right, Will, as always, give us the spoiler-free brief synopsis of Bombshell, if you will, and your initial thoughts. Was this worth seeing in theaters, checking out on VOD at some point maybe, or even skipping entirely could be a valid option? What do you think?
Yeah, so Bombshell is the latest ripped from the headlines dramatization of something that really happened. This time written and directed by Jay Roach. He's a guy that has done a few things along these lines, and like mainly for HBO. He's made a few of these. I think it's called like The Game or something like that. Anywho's, this movie here is about everything that happened at Fox News a few years ago when several women came forward with reports that the head of Fox News, Roger Ailes, was creating a toxic atmosphere, which included sexual harassment for the women that worked both on and off camera for that outlet. And it stars Charlize Theron as Megyn Kelly. And, quick side note, Charlize Theron looks and sounds identical to Megyn Kelly, and it is probably the biggest selling point of this film, just how uncanny that that makeup and performance is. We also have Nicole Kidman as Gretchen Carlson, and the other lead here is Margot Robbie playing a character named Kayla, who is a composite character, sort of like crafted from other accounts to make an original character from the movie. You also have John Lithgow as Roger Ailes, maybe a little bit less good of a makeup job than what Charlize Theron got. You have the CGI head of Bill O'Reilly, and you've got Richard Kind as Richard Kind, who is sometimes called Rudy Giuliani in this movie. So, look, this is an okay movie. This is a very, very okay movie. It is definitely one of those movies that when we were getting ready for everything for today's show, I remember going like, oh yeah, I watched Bombshell. I had to kind of like rethink through it. Like Cats, oh God, I remembered what happened in Cats. Marriage Story, oh yeah, I remember what happened in that. And Bombshell, I had to go like, fuck, what was this movie again? So it's a very okay movie. Obviously, it's important to follow stories that are about believing women, especially in these like kind of toxic environments. And I think that there's some of that is really compelling here. And again, the Megyn Kelly performance by Charlize Theron is so freaking spot on. It feels like a celebrity body double. But it's hard also to like root for Megyn Kelly. I think that's one of the big things that I have. And I will 100% put that as a bias here. Obviously, the things that happened to her shouldn't have happened to her. but it's also, the film also kind of goes out its way to kind of make her the hero of this story, when there's several other women who, including the Gretchen Carlson character, who also have an important role to play in what happened and feel like they're much more sidelined. And I know part of that is because Charlize Theron is one of the producers on this film, so I'm sure that helped kind of slant the weighting of how the story was told. I don't know. This is definitely one to watch on HBO later on. I wouldn't rush out to see this one. I wouldn't prioritize it, but at some point it's going to come across your television, and I don't think you're going to have a bad time with it. I just don't think it's something you really need to seek out.
All right, so not a super recommend for Will this time. I'll say for me, Will, I want to echo what you mentioned about Charlize Theron. I think she did a fantastic job in this movie. I spent the first 20 minutes of this movie trying to figure out who Charlize Theron was playing, and then I realized she was Megyn Kelly. I was like, holy fuck, that's been Charlize Theron this whole time? They did a really phenomenal job with the makeup, and she was just phenomenal in sort of adopting the posture and the way Megyn Kelly moves and the voice, the way she sounds. I mean, just exceptional. But I will say, it was hard for me watching this movie because we just finished watching Apple's The Morning Show a couple weeks ago, which if you haven't seen that, Will, I'm not sure. Have you seen The Morning Show yet?
We'll talk afterwards. I bailed.
Oh, okay. Well, it's a little hard to get into. You got to get past the first few episodes, but it handles this topic as well, and I think it handles this topic so much better than this movie does. So I found myself constantly comparing Bombshell to The Morning Show, and I felt like that was almost a little bit of a disservice to this movie, possibly ? But I mean, I don't know. I struggled to separate the two, and anytime I'm having to mentally fight with myself during a movie, it kind of pulls me out of the film a little bit as well. But I think the performances were fine here. Margot Robbie is Margot Robbie. I mean, I like seeing her show up in things. Nicole Kidman, I thought, did a great job as Gretchen. John Lithgow, though, oh my god, like whatever they did with like the fat suit / CGI, whatever it was, it did not work for me. I think they were trying to make him as gross and disgusting as possible. Well, mission accomplished, but it looked really bad. Like you totally could tell like it was fake. Kate McKinnon was fun here. I like the role that she played in this film. We'll talk more about a few things in spoilers, but overall, I liked this movie. I wouldn't say I loved this movie. I would say maybe wait for VOD if you're looking for something to watch on a rainy Saturday without much else going on. This could be it, but this isn't a run out and catch it for me. Jim, how about for you?
Yeah, I like this movie as well. Maybe I liked it a little bit more than you guys did. I, for one, did not follow the whole, Fox News thing when it was happening, the Roger Ailes and all that stuff that was going on. So this movie, even though I don't know how much of it was fictionalized, I don't know how much of it was true to life. It's always hard to tell because you don't know, nobody knows the real story, I guess. But it felt like it was a real thing that was going on, and a lot of it could have happened. But in terms of like the story, I was interested. The one thing that did get me is this is one of those stories where they keep introducing characters, like a lot of characters. There's a lot of characters stuffed into this movie, and a lot of them happen to be, and this is probably a knock on Fox News more than it is of anything else, a lot of them happen to be attractive blonde females, right? So like I'm mixing them up
too, yeah.
I'm mixing them up as I'm watching almost until I got into the movie and I could tell, which characters were which. It's crazy at some point. I mean, and I have trouble with sometimes with stories that have, like, they keep introducing all these characters, keeping track of who's who until the thing settles and kind of hits its stride. But I did like it. I think you guys are right on. I think this is one you can watch fine when it hits VOD. It's not particularly, I'll say, cinematic, right? This is a drama. This is like a newsroom drama. So, it's not like you're missing out on fantastic cinematography. if you don't see it in a movie theater. It's perfect for that. The performances I really liked. We're going to talk a little bit more, I think, about Kate McKinnon and the Margot Robbie character, which I thought was very interesting. I always like Nicole Kidman and Charlize Theron in anything you put them in. I mean, the performances here I thought were really good. Like you said, Lithgow having to work through the prosthetics or whatever they had on him seemed like maybe a little too much to handle. But otherwise, it was good. Didn't we have Mark
Duplass? Yeah.
Mark Duplass in this, and in the morning show.
Yep.
So that was a weird crossover.
It's been a weird year for Mark Duplass.
I'm like,
huh?
Chip, what are you doing at Fox News?
Right. It's almost like he's playing the same character almost. It's like, wait, is this like a closed universe, like a newsroom universe? Anyway, good stuff. I thought it was good. Definitely worth seeing. To me, this is a recommend, but I would recommend it on VOD.
All right. Sounds like a triple sort of maybe recommend on VOD. Do you guys have any other non-spoiler thoughts before we make that transition?
Nah.
I don't know. I don't really have much that we should talk about in spoilers.
All right. Well, in that case, we are officially taking the lid off the can of spoilers. If you haven't seen Bombshell yet, and you don't want to have your innocence derailed, this is your chance to step away, do what you need to do. But spoilers for Bombshell are fair game. Okay, I tried to slow it down a little bit, but here we go. Spoiler time. Will, why don't you kick things off this time with spoilers? Jim went twice in a row. Seems fair. Jim, that's not a knock. Not a knock against you. But Will, anything from a non-spoiler perspective you want to kick things off with?
So I think the place you'd really look at from a spoiler perspective here is obviously the stuff that was the more Megyn Kelly, Gretchen Carlson stuff is very much like ripped from the headlines. So you kind of know the trajectory of that if you're following along. So, but the stuff that was created more whole cloth for the film were the Margot Robbie character. I know I mentioned that beforehand. The Kayla character. She's kind of the third lead, and she's a very ambitious young woman who is a kind of like she's experiencing everything in real time, whereas a lot of the other women are kind of like accounting like things that have happened to them in the past. Well, her story also gets entangled with the Kate McKinnon character that Jim had mentioned, who is a closeted liberal lesbian who was working at Fox because it was like the only place that would hire her. And the two of them form a kind of a relationship, both a friendship and a sexual relationship. Although with the Margot Robbie character, much more of the lines of like, hey, no, this is just like, I'm not a lesbian. I'm just someone who sometimes has sex with women. And she has much more of like kind of like an evangelical background.
Even more in the closet than Kate McKinnon is.
Yeah. So I think there's something there to talk about the way that people are sort of like in these highly charged like workplace environments, not just like the toxic like sexuality and stuff that happened, because obviously what Ailes did was wrong, and that's kind of what the movie is about. But also you see this cascading effect where anyone that sort of like wanted to like either expose that or buck the system, so to speak, was immediately like they tried to suppress and put them down in place by their peers and by other people within that studio environment. And I think that speaks so much to how like it's not just the abuser that is a part of the problem with these types of things. It's also the environments that sort of allow the abuser to stay in power and who like suppress like the women who like to speak up. Like I remember a scene in this movie where about the time that the lawsuits start happening and the first few stories start breaking, several of the other anchors who hadn't experienced the same thing start going through and sort of like rallying everyone against the whistleblowers and like wearing shirts like I support like Roger, questioning people like, what are your motivations really? I think all of that was the most compelling part of the movie to me too, just sort of seeing how these things are allowed to thrive. And I think that bleeds over to like the Kate McKinnon character, who didn't feel comfortable sort of like revealing that portion of her because she knew that she would be targeted or she would be sort of like suppressed by those around her.
Yeah, I mean, you got a sense that anybody, of course, Roger Ailes was the manager. I'm trying to think what he was. He was like he wasn't the owner of the station, but he was like the day-to-day the big boss, right? The big boss who was running production, big boss, whatever you want to call it. And this movie, I think, highlights how difficult it is when you have the person who's doing the bad things at that level of power, that has that level of power over everybody, especially in this environment where people are hired and fired like that. There's almost like there's almost like no working your way up or working your way down. It's like if the big boss likes you, he's just gonna take you from here and put you here, and that's what you do. So it's difficult for these women. You know, if it was just another coworker, one of the guys who works in the newsroom, they report him to HR. It becomes a thing. The guy gets canned, right? He's out, and he gets disciplined or canned. But when it's the guy at the top, that's like it can seem, I would imagine, to be almost like an insurmountable evil that has to be addressed. And so I think this movie portrayed that pretty well. How difficult it is to go after these guys at the top that are doing this. And also, Will, like you mentioned, how that attitude kind of pervades down through the structure of the corporation and affects everything that they do. So, yeah, I mean, like I said, I liked it. The Kate McKinnon character was really interesting to me, and the Margot Robbie or Sharon Tate character, again, it's almost like the same character was in this movie. And that was interesting. And then I don't know if you guys saw the Golden Globe. Kate McKinnon gave a really, really nice speech about LGBT women and role models in show business, namely Ellen DeGeneres, because Ellen was getting a special award, and Kate McKinnon gave a really amazing speech testimonial to Ellen. So that ties in with this movie as well and her character.
Hey, Brad.
Hey, Will, what's up?
What did you think of that weird, like, deep fake Bill O'Reilly that we had a couple of times in the movie?
I felt like I was watching Cats again. Does that help?
It really does. Yeah, for as much as the effects looked so good on Charlize Theron, we got some really bad effects for the dudes. Like they couldn't get a lookalike for Bill O'Reilly, so they used like a deep fake for it. They get a weird fat suit for Lithgow, who maybe about 20 or 30 minutes into the movie, I sort of like my brain was able to flip the switch. Yeah. But it did take a while. And then Richard Kind plays Rudy Giuliani, and that was not a good fit for me. Like,
yeah, and that raises a question, and I don't know if you know, Will or Jim, what is the legality of using like a deep fake CGI to represent somebody who is real in a movie like this?
I mean, I would imagine that since you're also, if you're using actors, you're using the deep fake stuff, as long as you're not passing it along as long as you're passing along as like a fictional accounting of what happened, as opposed to like deep faking like a news story or something like that, or like deep faking something like that. I would imagine, and I didn't watch for this specifically, but I would imagine that little spot in the closing credits of movies that says, all scenes in this that are depicted are fictitious, and anyone represent. I bet you that was probably like 3 times as long because of the nature of this one.
And there was one that actually made one of these deep fake, I don't know if you call it deep fake, or lookalikes, that actually made me laugh near the end of the movie, was the Geraldo Rivera one. Yeah. Like I'm like, oh my God, I don't know if it made me laugh because it was so bad or because it was really good. And it was like, I know who that is. That's Geraldo Rivera. But that was a pretty funny one.
Yeah, definitely fun to see Geraldo quotes show up.
You know what this movie really needed, I think, for me, and I think that it's okay. Like I'm very much of the mind that it's okay to fictionalize parts of real life stories as long as you kind of get like the core facts right, and those things, those dramatized moments are meant to sort of bridge facts. So that's kind of where I come out with this. But you've got these two really compelling leads in Charlize Theron and Nicole Kidman, and they didn't really have much to do with one another. Most of the time, their scenes sort of happened in isolation, and they would refer to what happened. Like, I would not be surprised if they were like, I think the only scene that they are actually in together, and I could be wrong on this, is the elevator scene and then a phone call scene, and everything else is just the two of them interacting. I would have loved for them to have just fictionalized like the two women go to lunch and talk about their situations, because it needed something to sort of like bring home like what their characters were going through, as opposed to, for me, it sort of felt like Gretchen's story was sort of like put on the back burner. Like every so often we'd go check in on the Gretchen show. Okay, she's moving things along. Let's go check out Charlize Theron again, and it felt a little discordant to me.
It was quite noticeable. I even mentioned it walking out. Like, you know, did you notice that the Gretchen character and the Megan character like never actually interacted in the movie? And I wonder if that, and I can see how that could happen in real life, but you're right, Will. If they had maybe fictionalized something, you know, just maybe some kind of sit down between them, meeting of the minds or whatever. And I can see how in a, what's the word I'm looking for? An ego-driven business, because these women are personalities, right? The ones who are in front of the camera, they are personalities, and you can imagine that there's some level of ego involved in that, and maybe you don't want your ego to be like in the orbit of somebody else's ego, and I can potentially see that happening. I just wish the movie had either touched on that a little bit or actually had maybe a scene where they came together.
Would have been interesting to see. I mean, they did have the disclaimer at the beginning in giant fucking white letters that they fictionalized several parts of this story. So, or at least our screening did. So, I mean, they kind of gave themselves permission to do some of those things. It's interesting that they didn't, but c'est la vie, I guess. That's not the movie we got. But, man, guys, in an hour and a half, we've talked about 3 big movies. Whew, a whole lot of discussion points. It feels so good to be back in the saddle with you gentlemen for another year. If we stick to our mostly weekly schedule, we could hit 400 episodes this year, guys. 400 episodes in 2020.
400 episodes by the end of next year. That's the goal.
I think so. If we could line it up to where our 400th episode is our, I guess what would normally be our Star Wars episode, but our 8-year anniversary. And maybe that means somewhere during the year, if we have to like skip a week because of travel, maybe we squeeze an extra one in, or whatever. Like, it would be kind of cool if we aim for 400, but 400 at 8 years. That feels like a good like synchronicity.
Think about it this way: 400 episodes, 8 years in the year 2020, all even numbers. What?
My OCD brain is screaming for joy right now, Brad.
Well, that'll be our New Year's resolution, I guess, for the Movie Bears podcast.
Podcasts, yeah.
All right. Well, it has been a whole ton of fun hanging out with you folks. Thanks for joining us in the live chat this week. We definitely had a lot of fun during our Cats discussion. Thank you, as always, for supporting the show. It really means a lot to us that, 7 going into our 8th year later, you folks are still tuning in every week. Thank you so much for that. Real quick, guys, before we close out, where can people find you online? Let's start with Jim.
You can find me online on Twitter. That's where I love to talk about and tweet about movies. And my handle there is @JJP Out West. You can find me there, or you can find me on Facebook under my name, Jim Pugliafico. Look for me there as well.
All right. And Will, how can people chat with you?
Hey, you can find me on Twitter. I'm at Whatever Cove. You can find me on Facebook. Just look for William Lindis. Send me a message first, though, so I know who you are. You can also look for me on letterboxd.com. So if you search for William Lindis, you'll find me there.
All right, excellent. And you can find me on Twitter at iBradPro or on Facebook under Brad Harris. As always, please send a message first so I know you're not a crazy gay pretending bot from another country. And yeah, I think that about wraps us up for this week. We'll see you all next week, relative to when we're recording, with our top 10 films of 2019.
Ooh.
Big show next week. Looking forward to it. All right, everybody.
Got one more to catch, and then we're there.
We'll see y'all next time. Bye.